Hello, this is Gray Hughes of Gray Hughes Investigates on YouTube. Please hit that like button, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment after the video's over and let me know what you think. Bryan Kohberger has put out a notice of defendant's supplemental response to state's alibi demand. So Bryan Kohberger, his first alibi was absolutely ludicrous. It was just that he likes to drive around late at night. So now it says, comes now Bryan C. Kohberger, by and through his attorney of record, Ann C. Taylor, public defender, and hereby files a supplemental response to the defendant for alibi and in compliance with Idaho Code 19519 and Idaho Criminal Rule 12.1. Mr. Kohberger moved to Pullman, Washington in June of 2022. As an avid runner and hiker, he explored many areas in the Palouse. Of note, he explored Wawaway Park in July of 2022, and this became a favorite location of his. After the school year began, Mr. Kohberger was busy with classes and work at Washington State University, and his running and hiking decreased but did not stop. So he loved to go running and hiking. It decreased. It did not stop because instead, at nighttime, his drives increased. So at night, he would head out late at night, driving around. And this is supported by the data, Mr. Kohberger's phone showing him in the countryside late at night and or in the early morning on several occasions. The phone data includes numerous photographs taken on several different late evenings and early mornings, including in November, depicting the night sky. Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, as he often did to hike and run and or see the moon and stars. This guy is just a regular romantic. He's out there looking at the moon and stars and just daydreaming about what could be. He drove throughout the area south of Pullman, Washington, west of Moscow, Idaho, including Wawaway Park. So they're saying he was south of Pullman, but he was west of Moscow, meaning so he never quite made it over in that area. And here's what they're doing, you guys. Here's what they're doing. So his cell phone it must have pinged near this Wawaway Park at some point. As we all know, he turned his phone off during the time of the murders. Okay, so when they say, oh yeah, he was not over there, well, it's obvious. He turned his phone off at 2:47 in Pullman, Washington. He made his way over to Moscow, Idaho, Indian Hills Drive, and then he started those loops that we've gone over a million times. And then at, I think it's 4:08-ish, he would have stopped his car in front of the residence. And in those 12 minutes of time is when all four were murdered, because his white Elantra is seen right there. And then it speeds away at 420 at a high rate of speed. And then he doesn't turn his phone back on. So if we look at, I've already have this all mapped out. I'm sorry there's so much crap on the screen here. But the green here is his route back home. So if you go into here, we remember that at 2:47, his phone turns off in this area. So of course his phone isn't going to ping over here, but his white Elantra is seen over here. In fact, it gets seen at 3:26 at 700 Indian Hills Drive, likely right by this residence here, and then makes his way to Steiner Avenue, passes the A&W at 3:28. He's on camera there, no front license plate, just like Bryan Kohberger's vehicle. And then he drives into this area and enters the area right here, and actually passes, this is 3:28, 3:29, and like 40 seconds or so, he drives right by Linda Lane here, and then pulls in, and then we have three different passes that he makes by the residence at 1122 King Road. And he makes his final pass and parks right in this area here. Inside of this circle, he parked. You know, this little outline that I have here. That's where the white Elantra parked. And it was there for 12 minutes while Ethan Chapin, Xander Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez were all murdered. Inside of that 12 minutes, when they were murdered, a knife sheath was left on one of the beds in even a smaller window when he was attacking Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez. On that knife sheath was Bryan Kohberger's DNA. And it led back to Bryan Kohberger, and they collected his DNA after they had collected the garbage at his house and came up with a biological father of Bryan Kohberger. That was enough to get an arrest warrant. And when they arrested him, he was in the kitchen separating his own garbage and putting it into plastic bags and then moving that to the neighbor's garbage can. So that's why his DNA wasn't found in the garbage. And if you can come up with a rational reason why somebody would do that, if they weren't being suspected of being the murderer of a quadruple homicide, let me know in the comments section. That would be fantastic. Let me see what kind of mental gymnastics you can pull on that one. So Bryan Kohberger, to me, is 100% the killer in this case. He turned his phone off here. That's why it's not going to be pinging over here during that time. Now, later in the morning at 9, remember that? He left Pullman, Washington, and his phone was pinging and utilizing resources that the 1122 King Road residents utilized. And apparently, in this document, it mentions passing Floyd Cannabis Shop here. So obviously, a camera on here picked up a white Elantra, but they said it couldn't be Kohberger. Well, the thing is Kohberger has a history of turning off his phone, so likely when he was driving into Pullman, he may have turned his phone off over in this area, and then he drove by the Floyd's Cannabis, and, you know, maybe the cell tower right here that perhaps services this area still pinged his phone, but it was west of the tower, okay? So obviously it's not going to ping in here, and then when he leaves, he turns his phone back on again, and then it pings again off the tower, or this one, we don't really know, and then he continues back home. So of course at that point it's not going to ping over here. The fact that he turned his phone off, to me, is a huge element of this case, and it's interesting how they don't mention that at all in this document. So let's read this part. Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, as he often did, to hike and run or see the moon and stars. He drove throughout the area south of Pullman, Washington, west of Moscow, Idaho, including Wawawe Park. You know, it makes you wonder if that's where he threw the knife in the water. We'll take a look at that park. Well, why don't we do it right now while we're talking about it? So the park is over here, and a lot of people speculated there was a period of time where his vehicle sort of went off the radar. I think it was 5:32, 5:36. It pinged near Johnson, Washington, as if he was trying to, was it on this side? I mean, hell, what if it was on this road over here, one of these, and it pinged off the Johnson, Washington tower? If I said Johnson, Idaho a minute ago, I apologize, but it's Johnson, Washington. There is a Johnson, Idaho. They put that on the document originally, but that was an error. So here is Wawawe Park. Let's see what it looks like in there. I guess here's a couple 360-degree videos, so we can just get a look of it. So there's the river down there. And you can just tell by looking at the park, though, that it's right next to the river. So he may have pulled up right around in this area and just hucked the knife into the river. And hopefully they've checked somewhere in here. I mean, if you're a magnet fisherman, this is where you should do it. Throw your line out in the water all along here and see if you can miraculously come up with Bryan Kohberger's knife. Because the fact that they're mentioning that's a little suspicious. Like, why in the hell do we need to know that we go to Wawawe Park? That must mean that there's a ping associated with that in documents that we haven't seen yet. So partial corroboration. Mr. Kohberger intends to offer testimony of Cy Ray, CSLI expert, of cell tower, cell phone, and other radio frequency curricula vitae is attached to show that Bryan Kohberger's mobile device was south of Pullman, Washington, and west of Moscow, Idaho, on November 13th, 2022. Well, that's because he had his phone turned off. Okay, now why don't they mention that in here? That Bryan Kohberger's mobile device did not travel east on the Moscow-Pullman highway in the early morning hours of November 13th, and thus could not be the vehicle captured on the video along the Moscow-Pullman highway near Floyd Cannabis Shop. Right, now I don't know what time the Floyd Cannabis Shop surveillance video is, but I mean it is possible that Kohberger did drive using that highway to get there, and for an unknown period of time waited in a specific area near Indian Hills Drive, because it only takes like 10 or 15 minutes to make that drive. So there's probably about like 20 minutes of time where he wasn't seen on camera and he doesn't appear to be moving around. But of course his phone wouldn't be pinging in Moscow, Idaho, because it was turned off. Therefore, they're using the fact that he did that as if it's evidence that he wasn't there, even though there is surveillance footage of a white Elantra driving around that matches his perfectly. And, oh, by the way, his DNA was left inside Madison Mogen's bedroom on a knife sheath that was next to Madison Mogen on the bed. Additional information as to Mr. Kohberger's whereabouts as the early morning hours progressed, including additional analysis by Mr. Ray, will be provided once the state provides discovery requested, and now subject to an upcoming motion to compel. If not disclosed, Mr. Ray's testimony will also reveal that critical exculpatory evidence further corroborating Mr. Kohberger's alibi was either not preserved or has been withheld. So this just seems like more trickery again by a defense team, just like in the Delphi case. Absolutely crazy. Never ends. So let's take a look at this right here. Colorado judge finds a sea of unreliability in cell phone mapping data used by police. The founder of NetX, Cy Ray, a former sergeant in the Gilbert Police Department in Arizona, claims the maps produced by the track software he created are 94 to 96% accurate. Said police and prosecutors find ZX maps particularly compelling because they reduce ambiguity for a jury and allow law enforcement to dramatically reduce the area where the estimate a cell phone was located. He inflated his credentials, inaccurately claiming to be an engineer. Villa Sr. found that Ray, who did not return telephone messages seeking comment for this article, was not a credible witness. See that? Ray, the same person they're using. He inflated his credentials, inaccurately claiming to be an engineer. The judge wrote in his ruling stressing that Ray had testified that he is more of an engineer than an engineer, whatever the hell that means. As noted, his sole academic degree is an associate's, and there's no evidence that it's related to engineering. Nor is there evidence that Ray's taken any engineering classes. The judge continued, to be sure, he's created a booming business and has successfully pitched tracks to several law enforcement agencies. But a sound business model doesn't equal an accurate error rate. Villa Sr. said in his ruling that he found 3 earlier cases in which challenges to the use of ZX Tracks technology was not successful. Judges ended up accepting Tracks-related evidence in those cases, but Villa Sr. said he found those rulings unpersuasive. Most compelling are the complete absence of data to support Tracks' purported error rate and the scientific community's wholesale rejection of Tracks' methods. Villa Sr. wrote in his ruling, noting that he had found 3 other rulings from judges rejecting Tracks-related evidence or expressing skepticism of that evidence. In the case of the man charged with 3 counts of stalking in Fort Collins, prosecutors wanted to use Tracks' cell phone data mapping as evidence to show the defendant was repeatedly near the apartment of his former girlfriend, thereby confirming he was defying a restraining order barring him from stalking her. The tracks map produced for the Fort Collins Police Department placed the man in the vicinity of his former girlfriend's apartment nearly every day between December 30th, 2021 and January 11, 2022, the judge noted in his ruling excluding the maps. Pfaff testified for the defense that tracks isn't reliable. Pfaff provided evidence, GPS records from Jones' truck that undercut the cell phone location maps produced by tracks in the case. The truck's GPS records show that when Jones was supposedly at the apartment of the former girlfriend on multiple occasions, he was actually driving on an interstate, according to Pfaff. So that means, GPS is really, really accurate. Okay, so that means this guy's software, the one that's now on Kohberger's crack team, is just full of crap, allegedly. Okay, they come up with software that puts the truck in a totally different spot. It seems like it's sort of engineered to match whatever the defense wants it to mean or whatever the prosecution wants to mean. Whoever he's working for, he makes it tailored to what they need. The GPS mapping backed up the man's contention that he'd been driving back and forth from his home in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and his job in Johnstown instead of stalking his girlfriend. This guy's work was absolutely rebuked by a judge, and, take that as you may, everybody, but I think what we're seeing here is another form of quackery deployed by the defense team. Wow, what a joy, everybody, what a joy. Bryan Kohberger, in my opinion, is the killer. I'm 100% convinced that Bryan Kohberger is the killer in the Idaho 4 murder case. And when a trial happens, he'll be found guilty, everybody. When that trial will happen, we don't know. But leave a comment in the comment section and let me know what you think. Really appreciate you watching the video. And hit that like button on the way out the door. Thank you very much. And as I always say, until next time, be safe out there.